I'm thrilled to introduce to you today a panel of 3 participants who will be discussing with me some of the challenges that we've had in effective representation of different groups in clinical research and some active ways in which we're able to overcome those challenges and include more diversity into our clinical trials. So today with me, I have Dr. Fabian Sandoval, who is an eminent researcher, clinical researcher and physician. I'm delighted to introduce Yasmeem Watson, who is a patient who has actually participated in clinical research and can share her experience. And also Laila Gangotra, who is a caregiver and has been actively involved in her daughter's journey through clinical research. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Fabian Sandoval. Fabian, would you like to just introduce yourself to our audience today?
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Claire, for allowing me to be part of this great panel. So I'm Dr. Fabian Sandoval. We've started ECRI over 8 years ago, and our focus has always been this great need to include everyone in clinical trials. While we are based in Washington, D.C., we are fortunate to be in the tri-state area, so we have patients from D.C., Virginia, and Maryland that come to us because we've become this little beacon of hope and support for patients in the community.
Thanks, that's wonderful. Thanks, Fabian. Yasmeem, would you like to just introduce yourself to everybody in the audience?
Yes, my name is Jasmine Watson. I reside in the San Francisco Bay Area. In 2013, I was diagnosed with stage 3 colorectal cancer. And I wanted to learn everything about the process in fighting that disease. And so I began doing my own research, and clinical trial became the thing that I wanted to get involved with, and it was a good outcome.
Excellent, thank you, that's wonderful. And Laila, to you, would you like to just introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Hi everyone, I'm Laila Gangotra. I'm based in the UK. I am a primary caregiver to 2 of my daughters. I have 3 daughters, all have autoimmune medical conditions, 2 with multiple sclerosis and 1 with ulcerative colitis. My interest in diversity and inclusion in clinical research and clinical trials came about through my own experiences of myself finding it difficult to navigate the clinical research and clinical trial space, despite the fact that I'm educated to a very high level, to the master's level. And if I was finding it difficult, then I'm sure that other people must also find it very difficult. And this is the reason why I am so passionate about making sure that there is equity in the healthcare.
Thank you so much, Laila. I really appreciate that. And finally, I will introduce myself to the audience. I'm Clare Grace. I'm Chief Patient Officer at Parexel. I've been with Parexel for 4 months now as the first Chief Patient Officer in the CRO industry, and I'm delighted to host the panel today. So without further ado, I'd just like to give some background really in that, I think for the last 10 years now, well, it's over 10 years since the FDA first issued some guidance on clinical trial diversity and the importance of ensuring diversity in clinical research. And yet really, I think over the last 10 years, we haven't really made a great deal of progress. I think we've, as an industry, talked a lot about it and discussed and researched, but active change within the industry has been somewhat slow to achieve. And I think today it's really important for us to understand not only why that is, but how we as different participants in the clinical research process have learned mechanisms and ways that we have been able to either change that paradigm or observations that we have that will enable others to change. And I'd like to share some of those today and really dive into some of those in our panel discussion today. And so really today is about what we need to do to move the needle in clinical research. What can we share with our audience to ensure that we can move that needle, we can drive things forward and we can make that change. And so with that in mind, I'm aware that I think everyone now understands that changes need to be made at the local level, and there are a lot of missed opportunities to engage different groups within research at that grassroots level. There's lots of discussion around, churches and barbershops for different racial and ethnic groups, and I think that's, in all honesty, highly insulting at times. patients are people and they come from all different backgrounds with all different requirements. And sometimes that isn't necessarily just about race and ethnicity. It can be about age and gender, educational status, and access to healthcare. So I just wanted to start really by coming to yourself, Yasmeem, as a patient in that process. What do you think are the missed opportunities for engagement that we've missed in the past years, and what's your observation as a patient? And what are the effective ways that you've experienced for people to include you as a patient in clinical research?
I think it's missed when you have the initial contact with your physician. Physicians are oftentimes cut off at this 12 and 15-minute mark of speaking with the patient, when that's not a time to build it's not enough time to build a rapport with an individual and learn about their culture and learn about their past experiences. And it's kind of a bridge, a gap that it has to be crossed, because we're not listening to each other. The physician is cut off in the time frame and the patient doesn't feel heard. So we have to kind of set aside some additional time for them to meet each other on common ground and build a rapport, so they can have these open conversations about things like clinical trials, and have this trust with their physician on all levels.
I think that's a really important point that you raised there, Yasmeem, around trust, because as you said, if you don't have the time to spend with a patient sharing the information they need to understand the situation in that trial, it's very difficult for you to even trust that individual, isn't it? And I think it's a key point, as you've just raised, is that time and that attention to detail that's needed for patients. So that's a great insight. Thank you, Yasmeem. I appreciate that. Ela, I'd like to come to you now in your role as caregiver. I imagine that over the years you've had a great deal of input into your daughter's health status and requirements that they need to support their health status, and also decisions in terms of clinical research. What are your observations in terms of things that you think have been particularly helpful in supporting your clinical trial, the process of clinical research that you've experienced? And what would be some of the challenges, the things that didn't work so well?
When my daughters were diagnosed, we were just given the information that here, when my first daughter was diagnosed, we were just given the information that here's the 5 medical medications that are available to her, and just go away, think about which one you want, and come back to us and let us know. And we weren't signposted anywhere, and we had to do all the research ourselves, mainly by me. I needed to find out a whole load of information, which, like in the clinical trials, for instance, I wanted to know how many people took part in that clinical trials. What were the outcomes of those clinical trials? How long did the clinical trials take place? What were the adverse reactions to those trials? And we weren't signposted anywhere to go, so we had to find all this information ourselves. And that was quite a shock when you think that you being given this life-changing diagnosis, and then we're having to do all this investigation. And I think that one of the things that industry is missing an opportunity for engagement is that they're not leveraging cultural and race-specific healthcare organizations. So if industry's made an effort to find these organizations and do research on these organizations and to make connections with them and build long-lasting relationships with them and show a willingness to reach out to these organizations and engage with them. For example, the Asian Multiple Sclerosis Support Group is a support group for South Asians who have multiple sclerosis and their carers and their families. And I've been on the committee for over 10 years, and not once has industry approached the organization to engage with them, to my knowledge. And therefore, if industry can find such organizations and engage with them in order to understand cultural and race-specific healthcare issues, then it would make a great deal of difference.
That's a really interesting point. Thank you, Ela, for sharing that. And I think you raised two really important points that connect in with Yasmeen's. And the first was about your access to information, which I think is very similar to what Yasmeen said, in that, you know, having time to discuss and access the information via her physician was really a critical piece that was missing. And the same here, in that not only is it an issue in terms of the conversation that you're having with physician, but actually the follow-up information, the information that you can take away and read at leisure, if you like, and share with friends and family, needs to be more easily available to you and packaged in a way that is helpful for you, you know, to consume that information. I think that's really, really interesting. And I absolutely agree with you. I think industry are not engaging with advocacy groups as well as we could. And I think there's there's more that we can do, particularly around some of those the groups that aren't like that all-encompassing, just like, you know, the MS Foundation. There are satellite groups, if you like, that serve communities within that larger community. And they are equally important, if not more, because they have very strong relationships. And like you said, are able to really support with that diversity piece. So I think that's an excellent point that you've just made. Thank you, Ela.